My name's Priscilla Rosado Pimentel, and I am a digital imaging specialist with the Center for Teaching Excellence. I help with preparing materials for university professors, graduate students, and other instructors at the university. I can help with acquiring images, converting images, and I can help with teaching you how to prepare your documents and your D2L pages so that they can be screen readable and accessible to your students.
So the way that Priscilla and I had collaborated in determining how to present this is that I felt as though, to get some main technical points of accessibility in the classroom across, you can't really do that without an introduction to disability services in general and kind of what our role is for the campus. So if you want to envision, the Office of DSS is kind of being a backloader program where, with Priscilla being with CTE, they're on the front load aspect. So they're really there to help faculty and the rest of campus, bring in that accessibility from the beginning. And we're more of a secondary reaction or reactive thing on the individual basis for students. So I've got a brief introduction just to DSS in general that I'll kind of breeze through some information, and I have a couple questions for y'all that if you would like to engage in the chat with. We'll move into Priscilla's role as from CTE in all the technical aspects. I might have a couple things to include in there. And depending on how much time we have left towards the end regarding like discussion or questions, or if we maybe have the opportunity to even introduce some examples of technology or how things, look for what we work for. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, if that's okay, with a PowerPoint presentation that our office kind of uses as a general thumb for presentations. So I guess to start out too, if people want to engage in the chat, I was curious, what challenges y'all have in terms of being instructors. What challenges have you all faced with the transition to mostly online learning because of the pandemic? And in conjunction with that, what issues are you seeing as most challenging for the students that you are teaching? That can kind of help me to guide which information I'm going to be presenting. And so then I also just want to ensure that my screen is sharing the actual PowerPoint presentation and not my notes. So, like I said, in terms of the Office of DSS, we're here really to foster that culture of access, particularly as it relates to students with disabilities. Obviously, our end goal is accessibility in general for the entire campus. Just because a student doesn't have a disability doesn't mean that accessibility isn't important to us all individually. This is a slightly old graphic from a couple years ago, just based on some of the numbers that we have. But I think it's really important to still show just some of the numbers of the types of disabilities that come through our office. So if you'll notice, there's been a huge decrease over the last 10 years of individuals coming through our office for mobility concerns. And there's a couple reasons why that might be. Earlier on, SIU was very noted, like in the 60s and 70s, of being a forward-thinking, accessible campus, particularly as it relates to mobility disability. In the last 10 years, particularly, there have just been an increase in services overall. There's access on all campuses everywhere. So we're coming to think that maybe students aren't flocking to specific campuses that were known for mobile access, and have that opportunity to go everywhere. If you'll notice then also that the huge increase in particularly psychological diagnoses. And we have a few hypotheses for that just based on, you know, the mainstreaming and acceptance of mental health issues for people to actually go out and seek more assistance. Or is the actual prevalence of mental health diagnoses that much more increasing as the years go on? And we'll be really interested in seeing what our numbers look like for psychological diagnoses, particularly in this past year. We are seeing a lot more students come to us with diagnoses of anxiety, depression, you know, other things, particularly as it relates to the strains from the pandemic and online learning. So I think that it's going to be like a really interesting time for case study in particular. So there's three main points out of the mission of our Office of Disability Support Services. So we are committed to assuring that students with disabilities receive equal, effective, and meaningful access to all campus programs, resources, and services. So that's first and foremost. We recognize that diversity of abilities is a source of excellence, enrichment, and strength for all members of the university community. And then finally, our role as staff is to coordinate and provide support services both to students with disabilities and then working closely with faculty and staff in an advisory capacity, providing that disability education awareness around ensuring equal access within courses, the physical structure, and the online environment. So this would be an example of, you know, the service and consultation that our office can provide. So when we think of access, you know, in general, the ability to use the services and benefits comparable to those enjoyed by everyone. So disability rights are absolutely civil rights, and we want to ensure that everybody understands that it is not, you know, a pick and choose, you know, grocery list of what you can shop around for. It's a mandatory, it's legal, you know, required by law that these are civil rights for every human being with a disability. And so then we can take into consideration the difference between access versus accommodation. So again, we can kind of think of that access would be that front loader, proactive, what's the word I'm looking for here? The proactive system that you can use versus an accommodation being on an individual basis when you're evaluating individual students. And that's a reactive thing where they come across a barrier and then therefore we have to figure out what that barrier is, how to get around it, what is that accommodation or service that is going to be put in place in order to ensure that access, okay? So again, accommodations are individual. They must be tailored to what that student finds most effective. Access and accommodations should be provided in the most integrated manner possible. So essentially, they're going to be hand in hand or parallel with each other. Our goal is full participation in all that the university has to offer by people with disabilities. So essentially, we're thinking that accessibility is like a grassroots item versus accommodations being, you know, again, that reactive top-down implementation. And so here's where I want to really introduce, you know, if you're familiar with universal design concepts, particularly as they relate to, they came out of like the design and structure, you know, for buildings or physical barriers, you know. But when we think about universal design concepts for the learning environment, there are three main characteristics of a universally designed course. So first and foremost, you want to ensure that the clarity of your learning objectives is completely explicit, that there are flexibility and options for structure of how students will accomplish those learning goals or objectives. And by doing that, that can increase the motivation, it'll incorporate a student choice, and it'll allow for better participation. So what that means is that when you are broadening the choices for a student to engage in your learning environment, then that's going to in turn increase their motivation to do the best that they can do within that course. And it allows for that deeper participation because, again, they're having that choice of whether or not they want to engage in this type of assessment or in this type of project. And again, then that is all going to funnel into the object of accessibility, again, to ensure all students will have that equal access. So just for some background that, disability and inclusion historically has built their philosophical constructs off the tenets of rehabilitation or a medical model, meaning that there's something to be diagnosed and fixed, that there's something to be identified and cured. To an extent, this has been effective in cases which, you can provide programmatic access and accommodations for those who qualify, but it still reinforces a separate but equal system rather than full inclusion with a community of peers. And I'm unsure if any of you were able to participate in a webinar last week during Diversity Week. Dr. Amanda Krause had led a seminar just about ableism and how that incorporates to diversity in disability. And so ableism really characterized persons as defined by their disabilities and as inferior to the non-disabled. So these definitions of disability were created as a means of labeling individuals in order to fulfill a societal need, let's say for funding or participation in programs and services. But more recently, obviously, then we have a social justice model of disability. So that the disability is not seen as a problem with the individual, but rather as a problem created by barriers in the design of the environment and negative societal attitudes. So based on that social justice model, we can come to certain conclusions. Human variation is natural and vital to the development of dynamic communities. Disabled people are neither good nor bad and are not inspirational due to their daily experiences as persons without disabilities. Disability in itself is neutral and is merely just a difference. That there is no pity, no tragedy, no inspiration in the disability. That it is derived from the interaction between the individual and the society or the environment. That the environment is the focus of the remedy and the agent of intervention can be anyone who can affect the design of the environment. That disability is a social or political category that includes people with a variety of conditions who are bound together by common experiences. So most importantly, oppression and marginalization. And then finally, that inclusion and full participation is a matter of social justice and, again, civil rights. So just some concepts of what we do as an office then for services and consultation. Services are the accommodations that we provide. When we're sitting down and meeting with our students individually, going over all the intricate aspects of their disability and how that affects all of the activities of their academics, ranging from within the classroom. So those activities that you do within the classroom, such as taking notes, attention and focus on a lecture, classroom participation and discussion, things that you do outside of the classroom, reading your texts, studying for exams and quizzes, writing papers or other homework assignments, and then that testing environment. We advise and consult across campus. So again, this would be an example of that, in addition with disability awareness and outreach. We as an office, unfortunately, are just not equipped currently with the staff that we need to be able to get to the main point of disability awareness and outreach. Essentially, I should be putting myself out of a job. You know, if we had everything be 100% accessible, my job would not be needed, and you know, maybe on a different consulting basis, but as it exists right now, my position would not necessarily be needed. So we want to get to that overall goal of awareness and outreach eventually, which will build into that universal design concept where people are keeping this at the forefront of their course content and building, so that that's going to be a basis for it all. In regards to the disability awareness and outreach, we're actually really excited to say that we had just gotten up and running a component from the Multicultural Resource Center, that we now have a Disability Resource Center as well in conjunction with that. And that's in the works of being built. So more information on that to come. I'm going to skip over just the way that we do accommodations and services for intakes. This is just to give you an idea of some of the services that are available to students. Perhaps you've had students in classes who have already been approved for services where you've been notified and play that role as an instructor in administering some of these. So most broadly, we provide testing accommodations that can range from extended time, a quieter environment, if they need technology involved in that testing environment, note-taking assistance, whether that be a peer note taker, some other type of technology, a smart pen, a program such as Glean, deaf and hard of hearing services, so interpreters, speech to text, captioning, text conversion services, and that's going to be mostly related to what Priscilla will be talking about as well, in relation to how we can build accessible course content into the materials that are presented. Lab assistance, attendance modifications, course substitutions and waivers. Those last few are a little bit more invasive, I guess, in regards to like how that would potentially change or alter the main objectives of the course. And when it comes for academic adjustments such as those, that's when our office is really building in communications with the instructors themselves. And there's a lengthy conversation that's going to be had as to whether or not students will be approved for certain accommodations like that. You know, if an attendance accommodation is going to be approved, but, you know, a student has to perform A before they perform B before they perform C, then missing any of those class periods may not be able to be built in just based on how the course is built. That would be more in regards to how like a lab is built, let's say. Further services that we do then, housing modifications, we do loans for assistive technology, classroom modifications being more so focused on furniture and the design of the classroom itself. And so then let's talk about what we really mean when we want SIU to be a completely accessible and inclusive campus. So we have this ensuring access in the clinical setting. This has not been changed. I did not notice that since the last presentation we did here for student health services. But we want to ensure that we as staff are welcoming to all students, whether or not we believe them to have a disability. That means we have an accepting and accommodating attitude. To ensure that all of our website and online features are accessible. So following university communications recommendations and using what we have in place rather than, you know, going rogue and developing things that aren't off of a template and aren't through the use of communications. Ensuring that our facilities and events are completely accessible. ensuring that we are responding to requests for accommodations. So if you have a student who has requested accommodations and you have that notification, and that you are not of understanding of what your role is, then we expect that you would want to go through that process in contacting us and ensuring that you do understand your role in serving all students, and not to just say no, or to not just try and do it on your own without any assistance. That is our purpose as an office here, to be that resource initially for students, but then also on the other end for staff who are serving those students as well. And then obviously having policies and procedures in place with regards to any of the accommodations that are going to be administered. So in general, we want to ensure that you are treating students as you would, disabled students as you would any other student. Privacy, confidentiality, that's very important. So in the event of you being notified that a student has registered with our office and is eligible for certain services, it is a confidential matter where you are not, allowed to be able to disclose that information to anybody else, or to really be questioning the student, or inquiring why they are eligible for a certain service. On the flip side to that, students have every right to disclose other information with you if they so choose. But there's that fine line of whether or not they feel comfortable disclosing that, or that you are pressing upon that to find that information out yourself. In regards to considering possible accommodations and calling us for assistance, again, that kind of reflects back to the previous slide. Referring students to DSS if you feel that a student is struggling, perhaps on account of a disability, or maybe not on account of a disability, that you just want to suggest us as a resource, that then they have that empowerment to be able to contact us to see if we can assist them any further. So on our website, we have a full application process that I can show at the end of our presentation here. We also have information strictly for faculty themselves, and to remind registered students to contact us and ensure that they are in good communications with all of these different components. So let's, for example, if a student has testing accommodations and you feel as though they're not going through the correct process in order to take those exams, then to ensure that you're referring them back to us and that we're all remaining in good communications. And again, I'll pull up that information at the end of our presentation here. So that's just kind of a basic introduction to DSS as to what we do, what our role is, how you can connect with us, how your students can connect with us. I'm going to pass it along to Priscilla then, who's going to go over a lot of the technical components as to how you can build your courses accessible, and looking forward to her information.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm going to share my screen with you guys, and bear with me. I'm not very good at screen sharing. And let me get back here to Zoom. Can you guys see the screen? Great. So more than any particular technical skill, what I'm hoping is for all of us to start developing a mindset of presenting things in different ways in order to meet the needs of our very diverse student body. As we learn about and think about the different needs of our students, we will naturally start developing ways to respond to those different needs. So you're not going to get a clonk on the head and wake up knowing everything there ever was to know about accessibility. It's a process. You'll get better at it over time, and usually you'll get better at it pretty quickly. And if you end up needing help, that's fine. Trying is the most important part. No one's going to come to your door and be like, oh, you did a terrible job with your accessibility. There's no accessibility police. Go ahead and try running your accessibility checkers. Go ahead and do, Google a question and see if you can make your materials more accessible. So on the other hand, if Disability Support Services contacts you and tells you that you have a student who needs accommodation enrolled in your publicly offered course, it is mandatory for you to provide your course materials so they can be made accessible for that student. It's a legal obligation. Refusing reasonable accommodation for disability is a violation of human rights and the Americans with Disabilities Act. Before we're done here, I'm going to put in the faculty accessibility checklist, and let me show you around the website that DSS has. It's accessibility.siu.edu, and I misspoke. It's not, DSS helped put this together, but this is just a general website on accessibility and how to be accessible online. So you see there's a little section here for Desire to Learn, D2L, Microsoft. So, and it deals with all the Microsoft Office products like PowerPoint and Word and Excel. Then there are things for web accessibility, and then for video and audio, where you can get instructions on how to generate captions for your video and how to correct those captions. And while I'm mentioning captions, it's great for us to get our lectures captioned and any video we have captioned and correct the captions ourselves. But if you're contacted by DSS, you need to work with them, let them take care of the captioning and that sort of thing, because they are very familiar with the standards that need to be met for a student who needs an accommodation. So I'm going to switch over to the accessibility checklist.
And again, you can find that checklist. It's at the upper right-hand corner of that accessibility website.
There are handouts and links to different, do you see the checklist, Daniel? No?
No, you're still on you're on video and audio.
Okay, sorry. Let me try that again. Okay, here we are. So this is a checklist you can download, and it helps you sort of think about all the things you need to do for your course. So when we're teaching, we need to have accessible documents, text equivalents for images, and text equivalents for video and audio. I'm going to go backwards and talk about text equivalents first, and then accessible documents. If this feels overwhelming, remember you have the accessibility website to help you. The Center for Teaching Excellence is here as well. We can do one-on-one sessions with you. We have instructional designers that can help you with developing an accessible course. And we can help you with obtaining, actually getting a hold of materials and creating materials for your course that are accessible. And if you're, as we said before, if you're contacted by DSS, they are there to help you. You won't be expected to figure it out on your own. And then with this checklist, there are links throughout the document that will take you to web pages to help you with your with whatever questions you have about accessibility. And a final thing you can try if you're trying to figure out something like heading levels or list feature is to just Google Microsoft Office list feature or D2L table headings and see what Google returns for you. So text equivalent for images. All images included in the course site must have a short description known as alt text. In Microsoft Word, If you run your accessibility checker, it will find missing alt text for you. Alt text describes a picture that you have in your document. D2L also has an accessibility checker, and generally when you import your image, D2L will prompt you to add alt text. Alt text is just a brief description of what's going on in your image. It's important to identify those images because your user will hear that there's an image but not see it. So it can cause confusion and concern. And so that's why you also want to know when it's a decorative image. So they can go, okay, it's not important, it's just a decoration. So, and when you think about images, you know, charts are great, but it shouldn't be the only way you convey information. Text is great, but it shouldn't be the only way you can convey information. You should have more than one way to describe an image or an idea or illustrate something. And so we'll move on to text equivalents for audio and video. For audio and video recordings, a text equivalent can be helpful for all learners. For audio, this can be in the form of a transcript. For video, this should be in the form of captions, which are added to the video. There are like 3 or 4 different tools you can use to subtitle to caption your videos. They will all auto-generate the captions for you. You don't have to enter them, but you do need to go through and correct them. The rate's only like 70%, and you can actually communicate misinformation to your students if you don't correct your captions. You're really trying to be 100%. And students who are working on their reading skills or on their first standard English skills versus an inner city or isolated rural regional dialect, they really need, you know, it really helps if your captions are correct so they know what exact word you're talking about in case you pronounce it differently than they do. And so you also want to add punctuations to your captions. Typically, the auto caption generators don't include the punctuation that you want. At first, I didn't think it was important. And then I was following along with someone else's captions and I wasn't sure what the pacing was. And I realized I knew where my punctuation was supposed to be, but nobody else did. Another thing that I didn't pay a lot of attention to early on was making sure that my captions lined up with what I was saying. And you know, it's kind of a pain in the neck if your captions aren't on time. But when I was watching another presentation and the captions were really off, the captions were almost not usable for me. It was really just more confusing and not helpful at all. So, so those are some things you want to keep in mind when you're putting your captions together. And also, if something is happening in your video that makes a noise, describe it in your captions in parentheses, like doorbell rings or loud crash. Stuff that happens, but that someone just seeing it won't know about. You know, when we talk about inclusive accessibility, a parent with a sleeping child does not have an official disability, but the need to watch the video with the sound off and the captions on is very real and affects their learning and how they perform in your class. You may have a student with a disability whose biggest challenge is connectivity, and being able to download your lectures, hopefully with an SRT file, can not necessarily have anything to do with their disability, but make it for them to access your materials. So when we talk about accessibility, it's not always hard and fast. And that's also why we want to be proactive. So no one has to come and explain that, you know, they have to stay home with the kids and they're sleeping and it's a small house and they need to be able to hear, to read the captions. It's nice if they're just there. So if you look in the accessibility checklist, we have links for Zoom, YouTube, Echo 360, and Microsoft Stream, which are all tools you can use to auto caption and then edit your captions. And since I mentioned it, I think it's really great to make your videos available for download. And when you do that, you also want to download the SRT or VTT caption file, name it the same as your movie file, and have it available in the same folder as the movie. Best practice would be to use free software like Handbrake, or that's something you can Google for, free software to compress my movies with. And that software will make the video as small as possible for download. This saves time and money for learners who don't have unlimited access to the internet. So accessible documents. You are going to prepare your documents in a way that would allow those with visual, hearing, or cognitive disabilities to access your information. You probably won't use everything. You're not going to use every accessible thing when you create your documents. Not everyone is going to use the equation editor. Not everyone is going to use lists. So one of the best things I recommend for people is to start out with something called the accessibility checker. There's one in Microsoft Office products and in D2L as well. And you just run it, it's like spell check, and it catches things that might be issues. And sometimes it's not an issue and you tell it to ignore the problem. But then other times it catches things that you didn't think about. And so in my little graphic here, it's an eyeball with a check mark in D2L. And you can find it in the info ribbon under the file menu. Actually, it's under, it is under info, and it's under check for, I can't read that, inspect document. And so it'll be check accessibility. It has a little wheelchair there. And then if you're in Office 365, it's in the review ribbon. And so you run that, it brings up issues, and then that helps tailor it to you. So you don't have to know every last accessibility thing, it'll pop up for you. You can also send me your documents. I can make them accessible and then tell you what I did so you can make your documents accessible. We have a 2-week turnaround, and I suppose we could hit a bottleneck if everybody wanted all their documents dealt with at once. But I welcome requests for help, and we'll try and get your materials as accessible as possible, as quickly as possible. And I think that's it. It would be a whole other webinar to talk about the different steps you would take in Microsoft and in D2L as far as heading levels and lists and bullets and links. But we can't talk about those if you guys want to. We're about quarter till now. Is that the right time? Yes. So we should probably open it up for questions. Dan, sound good?
Yeah, I think that's great. You know, Priscilla and I were kind of laughing earlier when we were reviewing this together that it's damn near impossible to try and hone all of this into 1 hour and touch on everything that we feel is important that's really going to allow people to walk away and feel as though they're experts in this. And like Priscilla said earlier, that like that's not the idea behind a training like this. And just to know like what your resources are and who to go to for assistance. And just the idea that if you are keeping accessibility in mind from the beginning of your course development, you're already like strides ahead of most people, you know, in the world of academia. So we really appreciate you all attending this with us today.
I have a question, if now's an okay time to ask. I heard you mention that CTE has folks that can sit with you one-on-one and look at courses and talk about accessibility and whatnot. What is the best way to prepare for that? Is it to like build your D2L course and then make an appointment? Or is it just like what is the best way to prepare to have that conversation?
I'm going to sound a little lame, but D2L has an instructional design wizard. And I know I went through that once and it helped me organize my thoughts. Like, I think part of it wasn't even anything to do with the computer. They're like, list all the points you want to make, list what you want people to get from your course. So, and a lot depends on how you feel about it. If you've never taught online, it'd probably be good to go meet with an instructional designer and, you know, and bring up accessibility along with the rest of the course. But, you know, if you're comfortable and you have a pretty good idea of how you want to lay out your course, then lay it out and then go to the instructional designer and get it sort of tweaked or refined. The big thing I would say is to give yourself enough time to make adjustments, because something that you were totally fine with might create real barriers. Like maybe you have a ton of charts and bar graphs and no other way of describing them. That means you need to put a little more time into your course.
Thank you.
In the past few years, I've seen an increase in students who are not able to get the diagnoses they need, specifically because the problem that they intuit that they have is something the DSM-5 only allows to be diagnosed for those under the age of 18, and their high school didn't provide those resources.
Right.
What do we do when we have an adult student who knows they have autism?
So still refer them to our office. Under law, the documentation is not required. So you do not have to have, somewhere on paper that it's going to have a particular diagnosis. That's kind of our role as like this jack of all trades coordinator, where we can, assess that as disability professionals to determine, are there signifying factors that would qualify this for a diagnosis. So certain things do require additional documentation, like in the process that we use for more serious accommodations, those next level like academic adjustments that I was talking about with attendance modifications, assignment extensions, things like that. Those we're really going to want to see some documentation that's going to support the need for those. But when you look at the fact that not everyone has access to an outside provider, whether that be financial or, having the insurance to go through that. So absolutely, if people do not have that documentation, still refer them to our office, because that's something that our office would still coordinate on.
I want to jump in here too. And I could see where someone would hesitate to go to DSS because they think they're going to have to come up with money for stuff. And that's not necessarily the case. A lot of students, when they're in high school, can manage their disabilities. They can manage their ADHD. They can manage their anxiety. But when they get to college, because it's at a higher level and more strenuous, they can run into problems. And so, if you see a student that's really struggling, you might want to suggest, do you know that there's counseling services? Do you know that there's disability support services? And they can help you, just setting you up with a screen reader, or, everything doesn't have to be an accommodation for your course that you tell your professor about. So encourage students to make use of the resources they have here. It helps them perform better in class.
We have other questions, comments, concerns?
If nobody else has anything, I'll hop in again. For those of us who have to teach using special characters, specifically the International Phonetic Alphabet, how do we integrate those special symbols into our accessible documents?
That is a great question that I don't even know how to answer. I guess we would troubleshoot that as it comes in. I guess Priscilla, you might have more knowledge about that.
I've been the last week has been trying to get the right version of my software set to work properly, but it's supposed to have support for symbols. Adobe Acrobat PDF has support for symbols, and that's what you're talking about. Linguistics is different than, say, chemistry or equations, but there are different alphabets that can be used with I know with the screen user I have, or the text conversion software I have. So a lot would depend on, like if you're dealing with a really obscure language, that might not be in the set of scripts, but I'm pretty sure we have Arabic script and that we have different scripts that we could use to help interpret, we wouldn't be interpreting it. I'm just converting the characters into something that would be screen readable if the screen reader is also using that alphabet. But if they have it, usually you can get it, you can either download that particular language, or it's already built into both the reader and the conversion software. So it's not a lost cause, but you have to give me at least 2 weeks.
I have a question. I'm going back to those charts that Dan, you showed us towards the beginning of the presentation, and the sharp uptick in psychological diagnoses is something that I've been thinking about a lot, especially if you look at diagnoses. There's a jump right there between 2014 and 2017, and from 2017 to the year after that, I can't remember if it was 18 or 19, but I consider I am also in that uptick, and a part of me has been wondering in those years since I began thinking, oh shoot, is there an environmental component to this uptick in diagnoses? Is it a failure of support systems? And I don't want to go either here nor there about saying yes or no on that for this question. What I'm curious is, how can we as instructors advocate for accessibility within our classrooms and get our students to do some of that advocacy themselves, or understand the importance of advocating for that, not just in a specific way, but in a more general sort of keeping accessibility in mind kind of way. Do you have any thoughts?
So I guess I'm confused as your direct question then.
I guess my thought is, what do you think is a good way to get students to begin thinking about accessibility as a concern just to look out for?
So I think it's just the education and information. So accessibility doesn't stop at you or as an instructor, we want to still ensure that the presentation from students is going to be accessible, and not presentation in the essence of it being a project or whatever, but anything that a student is going to be submitting, in general within the classroom environment is also going to be accessible. And to understand why that's important, and not just as it relates to the nature of disability, so as Priscilla gave that example of, someone enlisting the use of captions because they don't want to have the sound on, or, individuals who are using different audio transcriptions for describing videos and things like that. That it's in the case of universal design, where it is important for a multitude of populations, not just, the subset of disability. So I think that it's really just, for individuals to be building that awareness within their classrooms, and promoting it for their students. I think that that's where it really starts.
And I'd like to say, model the behavior, like go ahead and run your accessibility checker and talk to your students about that. Say, I was making this chart to show you guys, and I realized that if you couldn't see the chart, you wouldn't have any idea what I was talking about. And so I went ahead and made this great description for this chart. And, because sometimes someone gets hit in the face with a soccer ball and they can't see right for a few days. Sometimes, you get an ear infection and you can't hear anything and you need another way to hear it. So sort of casually insert it into your own teaching and your own daily life and model that to your students.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But watch out for your your internal biases against people with handicaps, because I find myself being ableist all the time and it's awful.
All right.
Priscilla,
Thank you.
and Alex, your question and what you said there, Priscilla, seems to speak to what you were talking about, Dan, like the agent of intervention. I wrote that phrase down because I don't think I had heard that before. And how when, accommodations is about being reactive, but we have, in many cases, not all, because I know sometimes like for one-on-one, the course is already built, but in other ways, we all have the opportunity to be proactive so that reactive doesn't need to happen.
Right.
And because we are the agent of intervention in many of these cases.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think I hadn't thought about what you said, Priscilla, of explaining what we do, because then that also like Bolton, I think you just said the word normalization, that also normalizes it, that it's perfectly fine to do things in multiple ways.
The other thing it helps with is it lets your students know that you've done that, and they might think to turn on their captions, or they might realize that hearing their documents being read out loud is an option. I was talking to a student and she was saying how difficult it was to be staring at the screen all the time. And I was like, well, see if you can't read your materials out loud, and then you can just listen to it and not be staring at the screen. I mentioned how I was going to listen to a podcast, and she's like, oh, I love podcasts. So being each, and she doesn't have a disability, but it can help her with her learning if she has stuff she can just listen to and not stare at.
On the first day of each class, when we're addressing safety protocols, how do we address the fact that the building we teach in is not super accessible and only has one accessible door and the accessible bathroom is nowhere near it?
So like no differently than, building into your course syllabus about how to go or where to go to for accommodations or further assistance, particularly when it comes to physical barriers and physical accessibility for individuals. They will outright know, whether or not a building or a particular classroom is going to be accessible for themselves. We are usually more aware of that, weeks before the semester or the course would actually begin. And that's when it comes into play that we look to actually transition where that class is going to be held. And that, and then that would just be a requirement for, the location to be changed for the entire classroom based on that.
I guess so. I have a question. I don't know how we're doing on time. I wasn't sure. Well, did this go till 5 or 5:30?
5.
Okay. So just very briefly, sorry. My question was, I have just anxiety issues, and the way that some of that manifests is the prospect of having to go online and having, let's say, all of these different tasks right there in front of me can sometimes be overwhelming, to the point where I wouldn't necessarily know how to navigate that, let's say with DSS, as like an issue of, let's say, needing more time for assignments or things like that. If, let's say, a student is realizing that being online or the online format is exaggerating or making anxiety issues, let's say, worse, are there ways other than, I mean, obviously, like navigating them toward you, but are there things that we can do in terms of, let's say, even approaching this next semester to make that online environment less daunting for people whose anxieties might manifest that way?
And I think it's just a matter of being flexible. You know, so when I mentioned earlier about, you know, the characteristics of a universally designed learning experience, to really have the flexibility of options for individuals. So certainly that might seem as though it would create more work on the behalf of the instructor or the person presenting that course. But to give students choice, I think that is most important when it comes to like eliminating some of the stressors that an individual encounters because of their academics. So let's say, you know, the online learning environment is really stressful for me and anxiety inducing because I feel like I have, you know, all of these set parameters and I have no other option than to follow the strict course of action that is being presented to me by the class. So that if you have like different ways to engage with that course where it's not just strictly, you know, having to do responses to a message board by this day on this time, you know, that there would be other ways to participate in that class outside of that. You know, it's just, you know, really opening our imaginations in the way that we present what's important out of our courses and what that overall learning objective is. You know, is it possible that this student can present their idea of learning in a different way that isn't just a multiple choice exam, you know, things like that. So I can't speak to like specifics on that, but I think that like to really explore options of what's available. You know, there's no set funneling that you would have to strictly adhere to, unless obviously those those determinations are coming from up above you. So yeah, I think in terms of using your imagination and seeking out other resources to really give students the choice of how they're going to interact with your course.
Well, awesome. We are past the 5-minute mark, but that was a really great ending question. So thank you, Bolton. Thank you, Dan and Priscilla, for taking the time out to come and speak to us and give us all these great resources. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who came out, and hopefully you were able to jot some notes down. And you can always go to the sources that Dan and Priscilla put in the chat, so that way you can save them for future use. And I'll also make a note that maybe an hour is a little short for the time that we wanted to do things, so I'll make a note of that for future use. But other than that, thank you.
Can the documents be sent like in an email to us? Maybe just like compile those downloads, send it. I just think it'd be very useful.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, Priscilla and I will get together and we can formulate an email that we'll send to Maddie.
I love that very much. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, other than that, I hope everybody has a great weekend. Safe Halloween, and remember that brand you tomorrow and to let your students know.
Thanks for all your work on this,
everybody. And I do just want to make one last point, is that certainly reach out to us if you have questions past this. We are here as a resource for you all as instructors and staff, and we really appreciate everything that you're doing. So thank you.
Jesse has a thing.
No, I got caught in the middle of a wave goodbye. I was just pausing.
Oh, I have a thing. Priscilla, you're an angel. I just want to tell you, you helped me about 5 years ago, and you've helped me a number of times. I've never like seen you and met you, but I realized when you started talking. I just want to thank you. You do wonderful work.
Good.
Thank you, David, also, yeah.
Always happy to help. I put the accessibility checker document and the accessibility faculty checklist in the chat, so you can download it from there.
Thank you.
And it's on the DSS website or on the accessibility.sau.edu website as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Hi, everybody.